Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 1st around here, and we got a lot of stuff to get to. It was a huge weekend in the world of college football, and a lot of it happened on Sunday, and we got to start with that. We got to start with all the coaching carousel stuff. We will start with Lane Kiffin to LSU. That was what I predicted on Wednesday. It took a couple twists and turns before we ended up getting there, but he is the new head coach of LSU. We'll talk about Pete Golding taking his place. Florida makes a hire. Auburn, Arkansas, Michigan State, Kentucky getting close to making a hire. UCLA makes one. And what is Penn State doing? We'll talk about all of that to start off the show. Then we got some big game reactions. We got Ohio State obviously winning the game for first time since 2019. Alabama escapes in the Iron Bowl in probably the game of the day, if I had to say, on Saturday. Texas upsets Texas A&M in the Lone Star Showdown, a huge one for Texas that didn't have a ton of CFP implications. And then we'll talk about Miami and Vanderbilt taking care of business. Before we get to a little bit of a whip around, we'll talk about Georgia Tech. Ole Miss gets a win. Now a more uncertain future ahead of them. Oregon handles business. And then chaos in the ACC. And we'll give you guys an idea of what we got in the store in Conference Championship weekend. Some great games coming up this weekend. But we got to jump in. And you know where we have to start. Lane Kiffin is the new head coach of the LSU Tigers. The saga has officially come to an end. He will not coach Ole Miss in the playoff or going forward the rest of this season. That was crazy. That was college football pretty much to an absolute T. It was very out in the open. Lane Kiffin stoked the fire just a little bit, and we'll talk about all of that here in a second. But overall, it was a little bit annoying at times. It was very long. It was a little bit confusing. It kept Marty Smith essentially hostage in Oxford, Mississippi for probably longer than he wanted to be there. But at the end of the day, Lane Kiffin is now the head coach of the LSU Tigers, and he has left Ole Miss with a number of staffers with him. We're still trying to figure out exactly who that is. But don't love the way this was handled. I don't think I'm part of the minority there. I think most people don't love the way this was handled. I think there's certain things that Lane would probably do a little bit differently. But the other part of that is when you're Lane Kiffin and the two main schools that were kind of pursuing him throughout this were LSU and Florida, it was going to be very hard to make this quiet. It was going to be very hard to make this something that just kind of went as normal, didn't have any bells and whistles, didn't have any craziness, especially when the governor of Louisiana got involved. It was always going to be a little bit messy. I think Lane made it a little bit more messy than it had to be. Obviously, the stories coming out over the last 24 hours about how he was getting on a plane and he said, if you don't get on that plane with me, you don't have a job at LSU. All of that stuff is reports and, allegeds, and we don't know exactly how this went down. We do know it got a little bit contentious and a little bit weird and a little bit messy. At the end of the day, they've come to a conclusion. It was going to be a little bit all over the place. I think there was no other way that Lane Kiffin hiring, especially with LSU and Florida involved, was going to go. That's just the way college football is. But don't love the way that all of this unfolded. I don't know if Lane loves all of it as well. But regardless, the people that saying in this entire weekend that were saying Lane Kiffin should be able to coach this team through the postseason, and he's done everything for this football team, that he has to be able to ride it out, think about the players, that's outright insane. I really do mean that. If he was going to the NFL, absolutely. He should coach the rest of the season. He should be able to ride off into the sunset with his guys, see the season through. He's making a decision not to go to another NFL team, not to go to another college team. He's deciding to go to LSU. He's deciding to go to a team that Ole Miss fans outside of Mississippi State hate more than anyone else in the entire world. You can't let that guy coach your football team. I get it. Maybe some of the players wanted to keep him around. I understand why some of the players wanted to keep him around. I understand why he wanted to be there. You can't let that happen if you're Keith Carter. You have to be able to set the line somewhere and say, if you're not going to be here with us, you aren't going to coach this football team, because here's the reality. The idea that he would be able to be fully involved in the Ole Miss CFP run while coaching LSU is just not possible. He might think that's possible. It is physically impossible for him to do the things that he was going to have to do for LSU and still coach Ole Miss the way that he has all season. that wasn't going to be on the table. It is a very good decision by Ole Miss to get him out that door to LSU and start this new era. We'll talk about Pete Golding here in a second, but overall, I think Ole Miss and Keith Carter made the absolute right decision. Even if you lose in the first round of the playoff, I still believe that's the right decision, even if you don't look remotely like the same team. And that's something we'll talk about more tomorrow when we get into the CFP hypotheticals and what's going to happen on Tuesday with the rankings. But it's going to be a different team. I feel pretty confident in that. Regardless, you can't let this guy coach this team going into the postseason, and he's not going to. As for the hire for LSU, all of the craziness out of the way, as for the hire, is the best one they could have realistically made. I don't think they were getting Steve Sarkisian. I don't think they were getting Kirby Smart. I know for a fact they weren't getting Nick Saban. So I think this was the guy that you were realistically going to be able to get, and you were able to get him. Maybe Dan Lanning, but I don't think that was realistically on the table. So you nailed it. In terms of the open candidates that made sense, I think this is the very best guy you can get. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It was a decision between, do I want to be a legend? Do I want to be a king of my own castle over here at Ole Miss? Or do I want a shot to be one of the best 5 or 10 best head coaches in college football history? He took the latter. I believe he has the capability of pulling that off at LSU. There's a lot of things that need to be figured out over there at LSU for that to happen. Doesn't mean it was the right or wrong choice. That is entirely the way you look at it. Lane looked at it as a chance to become a living legend in the world of college football, and I totally understand that. From a pure which job is better perspective, LSU's the better job. It has a better recruiting footprint. It has a more history of success. I think you can put together 5 straight years of what he's done in 2 years over there at Ole Miss, or really this year. I think that is something you can do for 5 or 6 years in a row at LSU. I don't know that that's the same case at Ole Miss. Now, for Ole Miss, this will not be maybe your only shot to do this. Everyone keeps telling you this is the only shot you have. You got to let Lane coach this thing. Don't let people tell you that. Ole Miss has done really incredible things over the last little bit. Obviously, Lane Kiffin has a massive, massive thing to do with that. But it doesn't mean you're going anywhere. It doesn't mean you're absolutely getting buried. It means things are changing. And you got a lot of tough decisions to make. And you're going to have a hard job in front of you this offseason and going forward the rest of the next couple of seasons. But I think everything worked out probably the way it was supposed to. As upsetting as this is for Ole Miss fans, because that's the best coach you've ever had. Period. End of story. It doesn't mean you're falling off a cliff. It's going to be harder to stay on that. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be harder to stay atop this SEC throne, stay in the CFP conversation. But we'll see what happens. For now, they go to Oxford, Mississippi next year. Lane Kiffin and LSU go to Oxford, Mississippi, and frankly, I don't think Lane Kiffin and those coaches are going to be the only ones returning. I think there's going to be plenty of players that after this playoff run find their way over to Baton Rouge, and that's going to be an atmosphere. I can tell you that much. I am a Texas fan, so I'm telling you right now, when Chris Beard went over to Texas Tech after he left, it was nasty, and it's going to be nasty maybe times 10 over there in Oxford when they do come around, and we will talk about that when it does come. In terms of the staff that he fills around him, going to be massively important. It sounds like Blake Baker is sticking around, which is the biggest domino you needed to fall. The rest of it is making sure you keep some of the really talented kids like P.J. Woodland, like all of the really talented young defensive players, mainly defensive players, that need to be on your team moving forward. We'll see what he does the rest of the way. I think they'll dip into the portal. I think they have a really good roster if they can keep some of those guys around. At the end of it all, Lane Kiffin is now the coach of LSU. Ole Miss moves forward, and it's going to be Pete Golding. It's going to be Pete Golding taking over for Ole Miss, not only for the CFP, but moving forward. He is the permanent head coach over there at Ole Miss. And this both makes sense to me, and I have massive questions about the long-term success that he can achieve there. It's really about keeping that staff and that roster intact going into 2026 because there's a lot of really talented kids, especially young kids on that defense, that if they were able to come back, you can put together a good season in 2026. If a couple of staffers were to come back, the Charlie Weiss Jr. situation is still seems to be up in the air, whether or not he's in Baton Rouge or Oxford. I don't know how, but we'll see what happens there. If they can keep some of that staff around, then you're in a much better place. So I totally get this decision. I think Pete Golding's a very, very good coach. He's done a lot better in a lot of ways than I thought he was going to do over there at Ole Miss as the defensive coordinator. We'll see what the long-term impacts of this are, how long he can kind of keep this rolling. But in terms of making this decision right now, I think it's a good one. I think it makes this team rally around this guy. I think it makes this staff at least stay as intact as you could possibly hope with losing your head coach. And you have a guy that obviously really cares about Ole Miss and wants to be there because he could be on a plane to Baton Rouge right now, but he's in Oxford getting ready for a playoff, and we'll see what happens with that. Again, something we'll talk about more tomorrow. But solid hire, definitely one I'm more skeptical of in the long term, but in the short term, it makes absolute sense for Ole Miss. This is the other big one. Florida hires Jon Sumrall. This one kind of made me mad, and not because I think this is a bad hire in any sense of the word. You Florida fans, and I don't try to attack fan bases in any sense. I think fan bases are their own thing. Obviously, there's bad parts, there's great parts, whatever. Every fan base has a weird dichotomy about it. But the thick-headedness to be so mad about this hire because he's a G5 guy from Louisiana is ridiculous. I understand. You got a G5 guy last time around. He was at Louisiana. It wasn't all that great. I understand all of that. Jon Sumrall is really good at what he does. Jon Sumrall, when you ask people about Jon Sumrall, the names that you will hear are Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, the guys that are so obsessed with being great every single day, that are so obsessed with getting that one tiny advantage, that one tiny opening, that they will do whatever it takes to make sure their team is in a position to win. That's what this guy is. That's what Florida needs. Florida needs, for lack of a better term, a psycho. They need someone that is so detail-oriented that they can take on a Kirby Smart and not be totally outcoached because they're not prepared for certain things. He is going to be prepared for just about everything. I can almost promise you that. The offensive staff questions are totally fair. Absolutely something he's going to have to figure out. I think he'll bring over some people from Tulane. I'd be surprised if he brought over the entire staff from Tulane. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. I think he's going to be encouraged to go out and get maybe a Buster Faulkner from Georgia Tech or some other offensive coordinator to kind of run that ship while he handles the defense and is a head coach, which is very tough to do when you're calling and doing all of the other stuff that has to be done. But those are fair questions, obviously something that he has to figure out. My take on this is very, very simple. If he is giving the backing from the administration that I have questions about Scott Strickland and that athletic director and how long he's going to be there, but regardless, if he gets the backing from the administration that he needs and the fan base that he needs, and I'm talking to all Florida fans right now, if you are willing to give him the backing that he should get and really deserves in a lot of ways, there's no question that he will be successful. I feel very confident in that. If he is given the prerequisite money, the prerequisite resources, and the prerequisite buy-in from everyone involved with that Florida program, he is going to do incredible things there. There's no question about that to me. Will he get that is a massive question to me, and we'll figure out that over time. But at the end of the day, I don't think you could have made a better hire unless you hired Lane Kiffin. I get being upset that you didn't get Lane Kiffin. This is a very, very good head coach that if you didn't get him, you're probably going to watch him do incredible things over at Auburn or somewhere else that was going to be competing with you. We'll see what happens going forward. I think it's a great long-term hire. In terms of the short term, it's about can you keep Jaden Baugh, Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown, and all the other talented young players in Gainesville? And if you can't, can you get other guys? It's going to be a heavy lift in year one. I have no doubts about that. They're going to play a tough schedule. They're going to have a lot of things working against them. This is a very talented head coach. And if he's given the time and the resources, he can do remarkable things down there in Gainesville. Auburn hires Alex Golesh. That kind of opened the door for Auburn to have a decision to make, and I think they nailed it. I really do. I think Alex Golesh is a great, great hire. The question I do have is with that offense, and it's not to say the offense isn't good. It isn't explosive. It can't do incredible things. We saw what it did in 2022 at Tennessee. I think he's going to have to evolve it just a little bit. I think he's going to have to change it, and I think he's going to have quite a bit of work to do on the roster. I think they're going to have quite a few guys transfer out of there. Now, maybe he'll be able to get in front of them and convince them to stay. I think you're going to lose quite a few guys. If you can keep Deuce Knight in that room, you'll be in pretty good shape. Now, obviously, you need playmakers around him. You need to replace quite a few guys that are going to the NFL or elsewhere on the offensive line. There are plenty of things that still need to be done. That's your number one priority, as far as I'm concerned. Cam Coleman, obviously, very far up there, and a number of other guys that you want to see stay in Auburn. I think you're going to lose some guys. I think this is a long-term great hire, and I think it gives you a shot to do what a Hugh Freeze did back in the day, or what some of these coaches that have been really successful at Auburn have done. A fun, fast offense with playmakers on the defensive side that really cause havoc. I think he's capable of pulling that off. Again, it'll come down to the staff. That's the biggest thing that we're going to talk about every time that a head coaching job is or head coaching hire is made. How do they fill out their staff? If they fill out their staff well, they can do incredible things. A lot of guys miss with that, especially coming from the G5 to the Power 4 level. We'll see. But Auburn absolutely hired a guy that I think has the upward mobility to get them to the top of the conference and get them to CFPs. It'll just be a little bit tougher of a lift as far as I'm concerned going into 2026. Arkansas has hired Ryan Silverfield. This is about as good as Arkansas could do. I don't mean to be rude here. In fact, Ryan Silverfield, fine hire. Really a guy that's won a lot at Memphis, done some really, really great things. Here's the reality. Your athletic director put you in a terrible spot when he was talking about this job, and he essentially just said, we don't have the money to let our football team succeed at the level that they should. Maybe that's changed, and hopefully that's changed. If it hasn't, Ryan Silverfield will do probably what Sam Pittman did. If it's changed, then he can do incredible things there. There's no doubt about that. That comes down to Arkansas's administration. That really doesn't come down to Ryan Silverfield as much as Arkansas fans might want it to. It comes down to the people above him. They haven't been in order over the last couple of years. I don't know if they'll get in order now. I know if they do, Ryan Silverfield can do some really cool things. If they don't, I don't know if he has much of a shot here. That's just kind of the reality of the Arkansas job right this second. Kentucky has fired Mark Stoops. It sounds like they're zeroing in on 2 or 3 guys that they could be watching, but this was a little shocking to me. I didn't expect Kentucky to pull the trigger here and just get involved in this coaching cycle, especially this late in the process, but they did, and they owe him $37 million over the next 60 days, and we'll see what happens from there. It sounds like Will Stein is the favorite as of right now. Would be a great hire. Sounds like Brian Hartline is also involved in this one. We'll talk about him in a second here, but at the end of the day, great hire if you get Will Stein, former Louisville quarterback, actually, weirdly enough, so that'll be a fun wrinkle there. Dan Mullen has also been brought up for this job. I think he might be waiting for something a little bit bigger, but who knows? There's definitely a world where he gets involved in this one, but at the end of the day, makes total sense. If they end up getting Will Stein, I think you nailed it. If you get someone else, I don't know. It's just a weird position to be in. I think Kentucky was going to make this decision at some point. You might as well get it out of the way early, and if you bring in Will Stein, I think you nailed it, and you can do some really fun things over the next couple of years. Michigan State has fired Jonathan Smith and has hired Pat Fitzgerald. This is a big one, and they nailed the hire. There's no doubt about that. Michigan State has been a program and a team that I think a lot of us have just been waiting on, to kind of kick into gear. I thought Jonathan Smith was going to do it. I really was a big Jonathan Smith guy coming in. I think this is a perfect fit for them because I don't know where Michigan State fits in the new era of the Big Ten with new teams coming in, with NIL, with transfer portal. I think you're going to need a guy that can do more with less. Pat Fitzgerald can absolutely do that. A very weird finish to his time at Northwestern. Kind of got railroaded in a little bit, in a sense, late on his time there. Everything has been squared away. I think you nailed it. If you're Michigan State, we'll see how that develops. Again, Michigan State's one of those jobs kind of like Kentucky, kind of like Arkansas, where you just got to get the backing from the people behind you or you're playing from behind already. So we'll see what happens here. I think it's a great hire in terms of doing less or doing more with less, exactly what Michigan State's going to have to do going forward. UCLA has hired Bob Chesney. This has been talked about for a very long time. Frankly, I think they signed this thing last week and they were just getting their ducks in a row. Nailed it. I'll be totally honest. This might be one of them second or third favorite hire of the entire cycle. They nailed this one. I think this guy is an absolute star, and I think he brings an offense to the table that can get UCLA to a place where at least they're interesting, where at least they're competing in these games, they're fighting for spots, and they're a desirable spot for transfer portal guys, for young players that maybe aren't getting the opportunities from other big Power 4 places. because of transfer portal guys. So I think this is a great hire. I think this is a guy that can do incredible things over there. He will coach JMU in a possible postseason. If that's the playoff, if that's a bowl game, talk about that tomorrow with the ACC chaos that went on. But overall, I think you nailed it. I think Penn State was pushing for this guy for a little bit, and then they got a little bit distracted with some bigger fish. I think UCLA got a massive guy here in. We'll see if Jerry Neuheisel sticks around. I'd be a little bit surprised, but who knows? Bob Chesney is a great coach. Cannot wait to see what he can do at UCLA. And then what is Penn State doing? Probably the biggest question in the world of college football right now is, what is Penn State doing? They have just watched 6 or 7 hires be made over the last 24 to 48 hours, and I don't know where they are. I really don't. Now, there's a couple of names. Kalani Sitake is probably the name. As of right this second, he seems to be the new favorite in this one, and there are some great things about Kalani Sitake. I can't imagine this is what Penn State fans had in mind when they fired James Franklin. I can't imagine this is something that they thought was going to happen, is that Kalani Sitake was going to be the number one choice for them. But here's what I can say about Kalani Sitake. He's going to win the margins. He's going to win the turnover battle. He's going to win the penalty battle most times out of 10. He's going to run the ball very effectively. He's going to possess the ball at a very high level. Those are the things that you really need to do, especially in those massive games where you play an Ohio State team. You're not going to be as talented, plain and simple. Now, you shouldn't have a massive gap either, but you're not going to be as talented. So you have to win the margins. He's been incredible at doing that. He's also been at BYU for a really long time, has always coached on the West Coast. I don't know. I have massive questions about that one. I do know on Saturdays, there's very few guys that do their job better than Kalani Sitake. So I wouldn't hate the hire. I'll be very blunt about this one. I think the hire is Brian Hartline. I think you have the hire right in front of you. Whether or not he wants to take it, I suppose, is up for debate. But if you can get that guy there, I think you can build something special. I think you can build what Ohio State has. I think you can recruit at a very high level on the offensive side of the ball. I think you will bring really high-level staffers that have a lot of respect in the industry over there to Penn State. I think that's your guy. There's talk about Brian Daboll. There's talk about them trying to steal Josh Heupel from Tennessee. I don't think either of those are going to happen. If you had to make me pick right now, I think it's going to be Kalani Sitake. I'd hire Brian Hartline. I'd do everything I can to get Brian Hartline in my program. I think he can take you to the next level. Obviously, there's questions about how late he's going to be coaching, what he can do for Penn State. All of those definitely have to factor into this conversation. But if you want a coach that I think will have you a national championship contender in 5 years, I believe Brian Hartline is that guy. We'll see what happens the rest of the way. I'm not sure if Pat Kraft knows what he's doing right this second, but we'll see. We'll see if Penn State can pull it all together. At the end of it all, we still have some openings, and we just got Tulane and South Florida and Memphis. 3 jobs that are massively coveted in the Group of 5 space. There's tons of offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators around the Power 4. There's great coordinators, or there's great just head coaches at the Group of 5 and FCS level that could find their way up. We'll figure all this out. As it unfolds, we'll figure all this out, but a lot of jobs were closed this weekend. Couple more opened, and we will cover them as they do. The main one, Lane Kiffin, off to LSU, and I think this is the beginning of the craziness around that saga and around that rivalry, but we'll get to that as it comes over the next couple of years. For now, we got to talk about football. So we'll take a little bit of a break here, then we come back and we got to talk about the big games from this past weekend. Ohio State breaks the drought. Alabama escapes in the Iron Bowl. A&M gets upset by Texas, and a couple more things right after this, so stick with us.